Welcome everybody to this Centre for Inclusive Trade Policy webinar. I'm Alan Winters, I'm one of the co-directors and I'm chairing the meeting. I'd like now to introduce Fernando Martin, who leads the analytical unit in the Global Trade Alert, and he's interested in measurement of trade and industrial policy and geopolitics, economics. He's going to talk about the salience of industrial policy using new evidence which the GTA have collected, and is of course the hot topic that is on everybody's mind. So I'm not going to say more, Fernando, and off you go. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Alan. Well, first of all, it's a real pleasure being here with you all to present this new database, our new initiative from the Global Trade Alert, and also to present some of the facts that we have already inferred from this. So then, if there is any question, I will be happy to answer either during the presentation or at the end, as Alan said. As you can see from the title, now we're going to talk about industrial policy and what is going on specifically on that front. You know, there is a lot of talk, mostly in the press. You can see this first chart that we present here with the mention of industrial policy in the major business press. That there is a peak in 2019, but all in all, there is an increasing trend. So there is an interest from different angles and then also in different ways. And there are also some narratives that are anecdotal evidence that have been also presented by the press. And we can see here in the slide some quotes, that the press and also policymakers, they associate with industrial policy. So my point here is that industrial policy is associated with different narratives that they're not the same. They can go in different directions. And some people consider industrial policy as a retaliatory tool. Then others consider as an objective, to promote the energy and digital transition in the context that we're living now. Also, they believe that industrial policy is associated or is a tool to restore production and ensure the resilience in the national domestic economies in this context of geopolitical rivalry. And also, other people consider that it's a useful tool to avoid disruptions in supply chain. But maybe considering historically how industrial policy changed, or what is the state that we are right now. So we know that industrial policy for very long was mostly used by emerging markets, economies, and now since that the West is stepping in, there are frequent calls for selective policy intervention by some governments in the West. And we also know that industrial policy in the past was mostly horizontal, mainly focusing on some specific sector, steel, iron, this kind of categories. And now maybe industrial policy is moving into more selective, more product category dimension. So given all these views, this evidence, this noise, associated with industrial policy, we believe that we needed to create an initiative to understand a bit more the facts, the evidence associated with what's going on with industrial policy. That's why we created the new Industrial Policy Observatory, this database, which helps to understand the landscape of contemporary industrial policy. So with this database, we want to answer 5 specific questions. So which governments are using industrial policy? What is the motivation or the rationale behind these industrial policies, these modern industrial policies? What are the policy tools that governments are using? There are a diversity of tools, either industrial or maybe trade policies that the governments can deploy for these objectives. Then fourth, which are the sectors that are targeted, which are the products that they are mostly targeted by industrial policies. And lastly, how much money is being put on the table to do these measures. And that's very important for the democratic accountability of policies. And then, all in all, these 5 questions will help us understand the so what question. Also, how can we actually make useful deliberations or useful evaluation of what's going on with industrial policy. And why us from Global Sweden Alert? I think we are in a very good situation to track industrial policies. Our monitoring team has been tracking trade other kind of policies since 2009. So in that sense, we saw in this chart here that we have been tracking industrial policies from 2009, or maybe better say, with the criteria, the inclusion criteria. So our definition of industrial policies for this database in 2023, we can move it backward from 2009, giving our extensive inventory of measures, and see how the number of industrial policy interventions have been changing from 2009 until now. And then we see that there is in fact a peak by December 2023 on the measures. So it's not only the press showing the disinterest, but also there is a alignment with the number of measures that the governments they are doing. So then, in case that there is someone that has to leave before I finish, I like to present the main factual evidence or takeaways that this database has, the six main comments, and then I will support each of these sentences or this evidence with a chart or with some data. But with the data that we have so far of selective policy industrial policies implemented in 2023, we have the following evidence. First of all, we see that now industrial policy is a global phenomenon. It's employed or is chosen by advanced economies, but also for emerging markets and low-income developing countries. They are all selecting this selective policy intervention that we can categorize as industrial policy. That's our first takeaway. Then the second one, that we see that there is sometimes a narrative or a motivation mismatch. So let me explain here. We see in the press and we see that people mostly talk about industrial policy for geopolitical or national security reasons. But when we go deep into the data, we evaluate the quote that policymakers they make as a motivation to implement any industrial policy. We see that this geopolitical and national security consideration, they are a minority against other stated motives that I will show a bit later. Then we also see that there are, despite industrial policies being implemented by all the countries across the world, we see that there are regional variations depending on the mix of policy instruments that they are used. And in particular, we see that the policy instruments, they are correlated, they are associated to the fiscal space that some countries have. Now, I will delve deep a bit into that, but we see that countries that they have more fiscal space, they tend to use more domestic subsidies. Again, maybe developing countries have a bit more of restrictions. They tend to use more import and export barriers as a policy, as a national policy instrument. Then fourthly, when we actually check the sectors that they are covered by industrial policy or the products that are affected, we see that dual use items and technology products, they are the large shares of 2023 interventions in our database, but we have to consider something very important, that as we measure the product by HS 6-digit categories, there is an overlap between the interventions, because there is also an overlap between these product categories as 6 digits. So that could endanger maybe a bit the definition of the motivation of industrial policies that don't actually affect how we interpret the industrial policy dynamics. So that's maybe better say that we can have an intervention that covers a specific product, that this product falls under the two different definitions, like dual use items, and maybe also a technology of a product that is used to advancing objective of low carbon transition economy because of this limitation of 6 digits. even though we know that the dual source items list that we use that comes from the United States is very granular, even 10 or 12 digits, if I remember correctly. Then fifth, we can also track the value of the subsidies, corporate subsidies that are linked to these industrial policy measures in 2023. And we know that if we sum up all the financial allocations, we count until $1.2 trillion of domestic subsidies that they can be considered industrial, and almost 600 billion they are directly towards goals related to climate change mitigation. Then also I will mention here that there are big differences between the countries that they implement these subsidies and the motivation. We see that most of these corporate subsidies that they transition to a low carbon economy, they're mostly implemented by the European Union and United States against other countries. And then lastly, I will explain a bit or how we can infer some information related with policy sequences by the three big players in the world economy: China, the European Union, and the United States. And I will show that they react differently to each other subsidies in terms of the tools that they use. By tools, I mean the policy instrument, but also by the timing. So there's some kind of differences in the time that it takes for them to react to another policy. Then just to explain a bit how we constructed this NIPO database. So just mentioning here that the new Industrial Policy Observatory records targeted government interventions, and they can have like economic or non-economic objectives. That could be security, social, environmental objectives, and there are policies that are aimed at developing or supporting specific domestic firms, industries, or any other economic activities. Then we are also able to identify different levels of policy measures. In particular, we have three different levels in our database. We see that the industrial policies, they can be plans or strategies adopted by different governments, which is the list of the categories that we have in the database. Then we have the bulk of them, like almost 60% of the intervention, the measures that we record in our database. There are policies or regulations adopted by countries, but we also record these firm-specific awards or interventions, which are almost 40%, meaning some financial allocations that they target a specific sector or a specific firm in the database. They also mentioned that we have big categories of policy instruments, but these big categories, they come from more of a granular policy intervention that is based on the GTA methodology. So we identify 58 types of granular policy interventions that they can be trade, can be more investment, or behind the border measures, or even technology-related measures, which is something that we expanded our coverage in 2023 to account for these tech measures to improve the GTA, not the GTA database, but the NIPO database. Now mentioning some details of some feature of the NIPO. So we track 75 custom territories, which is the ones that we have the most expertise in the GTA monitoring team. The inclusion criteria for these measures to enter in the NIPO is that they have to be implemented or announced since 1st January 2023. Note here that is a or condition, implemented or announced. Then also we select some product categories that we believe that they are most associated with industrial policies. Intervention, they cover a certain product. It could qualify as industrial policy, or if this policy is adopted based on certain state model. As part of the revamp that we have, because of the NIPO, we are able to identify the quotes and the motivation associated with each intervention. So we record that in the NIPO. And that's if they have certain motivation that we will see later in another slide, we consider that it qualifies this intervention as a industrial policy. And then, of course, the measure will enter in the NIPO database if there's an industrial strategy or plan. Then, as I was mentioning in the table, that's to show you, the last update that we have of the NIPO database, which is not public yet. It's gonna be public tomorrow. But as I was working on that yesterday night, I thought that it was nice to share with you. So you are the first one seeing this information. So this database was released in December 2023, and all the measures that they were, currently we have 3,514 industrial policies that are tracked from January 2023 until February. So this because this is the March release. Then out of these 3,500 measures, 676 they are what we define as liberalizing measures, or those policies that they reduce discrimination against foreign firms. So industrial policy is not only about distortionary or protectionist measures. We see that in this database, we also have some measures that aim at promoting competition or improving the competition condition of foreign firms in domestic economies. Then, as you can guess, this database is being updated monthly. So every month we include more interventions. I have to say that we do on average every month we are able to capture around 300 new measures of industrial policies every month. In the last round for February, we were even able to capture 400. That was same on average, but we're quite good tracking these measures. Over 1,000 new entries have been added since the launch in December. When I presented this back in January, we have around 205 measures. So now we are increasing it quite a lot, and it's not even March. So that's actually an indication that the governments are still implementing a lot of industrial policies. Then also mentioning that 98 of the entries that we have in the NIPO, they are documented using official sources. And we have this service, it's available on a subscription basis, but we have a reduced subscription for academics in case that is of interest. In any case, you have a trial version of the database in our Global Tool Alert data, which is with the information that we released in January. So then you can get to know the methodology. Also, you can see the Excel file with the 2,500 measures, all the measures that they are adopted in 2023. And yeah, you can take a look. But NIPO is a living data set, as I say, it's growing very, very fast. We are constantly improving it. And now I'm just going to present the evidence that is associated with the 6 points that I presented before. So the first thing that we see regarding the regional variation or the selection of policy instrument is this heat map that we have here. So here we see that in the y-axis we have the regions, that's geographical regions in the world, and then in the x-axis we have policy instrument categories. That's in which we classify information. Then, of course, under each of these, I believe that there are 7 policy instruments. There are more granular categories. As remember that we have 58 policy instruments. So then these 58 they are reduced to this thing, but we have the information of this granular instrument. And then the first thing that is of interest from this chart is that we see that countries in Europe, in Central Asia, North America, they tend to use more domestic subsidies. We see by the first column that is like some regions that they are, the blue is darker than for the others. Overall, we see, in contrast, we see that some other regions like Asia Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and South Asia, they rely more on import barrier. We do like blood comparatives, between the regions, and also relative, because different regions, they have a total different amount of total instruments. But in comparative terms, we see that this difference is important. Then also, concerning the export curves, we see that Asia Pacific, Europe, Central Asia are the most active user of these instruments. Professor Evenet and I, with some colleagues from the IMF, Ruta, we created some preliminary correlation, we explored preliminary correlation, and we could see that to test the hypothesis that the fiscal space contribute to the selection of policy instruments. And we see that there are some strong positive correlation. The deep pockets likely matter. So we see that the high per capita income countries, they tend to use more corporate subsidies, and developing countries, they rely more on import barriers. This is something that we can see already here a bit with the regional aspect, but by doing some econometrics, using the NIPO data, we can actually see this correlation. Then, secondly, even though there are a lot of emphasis on national security and geopolitics in industrial policy, when we actually check the number of interventions, we see that the most popular state motive is competitiveness. And we can see that in this chart. We see in the y-axis that we have the number of interventions in the NIPO, and then in the x-axis we have the different state motives that we identified, the monitoring team at global level identified. We have interventions that are associated with the strategic competitiveness, meaning that the policymakers or the governments, they implement industrial policy with the objective of enhancing the domestic competitiveness. Then also the industrial policies, they can be adopted based on climate change mitigation strategies to improve the environment or to reduce the use of carbon in the economy. They can also be adopted this policy as a way to guarantee the security of supply. It's something that's happened after COVID, and by security of supply we refer non-food. We have another category that refers to food security, but not like security in general. And then also the two remaining categories, if the intervention is being implemented because of geopolitical concerns, it's explicit. The government, the motivation to adopt this policy, it's due to the geopolitical situation or geopolitical fears, and also because of national security. And that's the first interesting finding, that we could believe that maybe geopolitical concern and national security would be the most popular category, but not. It's competitiveness, but we managed to report more. And then the second interesting fact here is that there are clear differences between what we call the West, meaning the G7 countries, Australia, South Korea, and the EU27, and the rest of the countries of these 75 jurisdictions in our dataset, regarding the mix of industrial policy objectives. And in particular, we see that so the industrial policies in the NIPO database, that the motivation is climate change related. 86% of these, they are implemented by what we call the West, against 14% by the other countries. And also national security, 83% of them, that implemented by the West versus 17% for the rest. However, most of the measures that they aim at improving the domestic competitiveness of the countries, they are implemented by the rest. So it seems that non-Western countries, if I may say, can use this term, they account for they care more about strategic competitiveness, and they care very little for national security and geopolitical concerns. This seems to be something that is only going on in the West. Or at least this is why the governments, they signal, when they adopt these industrial policies. Then the other point that I was making is that because of this limitation that we have with the product categories, with the HS6 digits, we see that there is an overlap between the categories, and that hampers the interpretation of industrial policy dynamics. And in this Venn diagram, what we have done is like we put in each of the circle the product categories depending on the HS codes. So we have low carbon technologies, then we have advanced technology products, dual use items, and then we have in the circle those interventions that they cover that they single out this kind of product categories, and then where there is overlap. And then we see that there are, I mean, first of all, we choose these categories because these are the most popular in industrial policy, given the findings in the database. And then we see the other interesting fact here is that a lot of low carbon technologies and advanced technology products are also classified as dual use, because we know that when we have the intersection, we have the largest number of interventions. So, as I said, that could be a challenge when we identify the product that are covered, or maybe just to see maybe the real motivation of the government, you know? Because when we have with the state motives, we can actually identify the quote from the official document saying what is the idea of the government or the motivation that the governments they have to do the things. But then here what we're seeing is like how the industrial policy affect what products it affects. So it could be situation that we don't have the capacity to assess right now. Government can say that it's implementing a policy because of climate change motivation or to transition to the low carbon economy. I'm thinking maybe something, for example, silicon, no? And then we have this product, silicon, that is also used as a dual use item, or maybe it's used to produce, I don't know, a weapon or something with this motivation. And then this measure also covers the dual use items. So that's where the interpretation that matters, where we can see some discrepancies. But the most important thing is that we have the information, we track it, either the motivation or also the product categories. And then it's just a matter of doing a bit more research and see if these two concepts are more aligned. And then we were talking about the money. I wanted to present this table. So here we see all the stated motives in the first column of the table. So first of all, we see that we have 2,486 subsidies, corporate subsidies in the NIPO database. Then out of these subsidies, 1,510, they have a stated motive. Our team managed to find a motivation for them. Then 976, they don't have a motivation. And then you can see the motivations that I saw before, strategic competitiveness, climate change mitigation, other motivations, security of supply, or national security. So that's in the second column. And then in the third column, you can see the number of new entries that they have been included to the NIPO database from January until now. Because as I was saying, this is an update that I make yesterday night, and it's going to be released for our subscribers on Thursday. So we see that we managed to increase our database in 1 month for 339 corporate subsidies. And then we're also able to aggregate the financial allocation of these subsidies. And that's what you can see in the last column. So we see that the aggregate value of the corporate subsidies that are linked to these policy measures since 2023 amount to $1.2 trillion. And we see that subsidies totaling almost $600 billion are directed towards work related to climate change mitigation. And again, here we see the differences with the national security and other objectives. Around $200 billion is allocated only to subsidies which aim at meeting national security goals. Just mentioning here that it's important to understand that this financial allocation, they can be distributed over multiple years. So what we account here is when the record is public, what is the financial allocation that the government expect to make, or the money that is presented in the regulation, and then this allocation they can take a bit of time to be fully implemented. And then the last point that I made before, the last facts, this just mentioning that we are not using the NIPO database to do these policy sequences. We will in the future, but I mean, right now we only have 14 months, so we are exploring how to make it, and the most information we get and the longer this project runs, we will be able to infer some kind of sequences of industrial policy choices by different countries, and in particular, in this case, the three big players in the economy. Some people call this table retaliation table or tit for tat table. I don't like that term that much, because for tit for tat, we need to identify or target specifically that one industrial policy has been adopted because, as a consequence, of another. So maybe take this as a correlation, meaning that if China introduce a new subsidy, how this subsidy is going to be, what's like what the European Union and the United States are going to do within 6 months and 12 months after China implement this subsidy. So we're talking about interventions in general, also the policy type of intervention. So the first interesting finding of this table would be like the three countries, they react differently to each other subsidies. But in general, they mostly react. Subsidies are matched with subsidies, but we have some differences. Then, for example, when China, so we see China in the second row, when China introduces a subsidy, then the EU introduces a subsidy within 6 months, 84% of the times, and 95% within 12 months. And then this is more than how the United States react to these policies, that the United States prefer matching Chinese subsidies with import curves against the EU. We see that 71% in the case of the United States. At one point here, 71% is less than 84 within 6 months, but also less after 12 months. But we also see that import curves are the favorite instrument. Well, it's more, they tend to use more import curves to match a Chinese subsidy 57% times more than the EU, and in the longer term, also a bit more than the EU. So it seems that the EU react to Chinese subsidies, and the United States prefer using import curves in a more extent. So that's regarding the replies to Chinese subsidies. And then also we see some interesting patterns across the Atlantic. So we see that the EU is more likely to respond to American subsidies with import curves than the other way around. So we see that when the United States introduce a new an import curve, we see that it's matched by another import curve by the EU by 44% of the times versus 35% the other way around. And here we see 61% in 12 months against 46% of the time. So that's the policy sequence choices that we can do with the global trade alert data, and I'm very confident that soon enough we will be able to do that with the NIPO database once we keep increasing the number of entries to the extent that we're doing right now. And that's leads me to my last slide with some kind of conclusions. Overall, just why it's important to understand what's going on with industrial policy, or some kind of use cases that you can think of for the use of the new industrial policy database. So as you can see, it's possible to do tracking of industrial policy measures by governments, and it's possible to do that by official sources. Global Trade Alert, we have the capacity to do that, have been doing that since 2009, and now it was just a matter of improving our methodology or like increasing the scope that we want to capture, given the new dimension of policies that we're seeing right now. So we provide this inventory that substitutes for any other collection or any other system. And we also see that it's possible to track in a forensic way the specific tariff lines, the sectors that are affected by industrial policy. There are even companies, as I saw with the from a specific intervention of awards that they are given, and even the financial allocation that each company receives. Then, in the very near future, we're being able to identify tit for tat, retaliatory or policy sequences between not only the three big countries but also others, and we can actually maybe see these policy dynamics also based on product or sectors that are targeted, or any other dimensions that we can find in the database. Because if I remember correctly, we have more than 50 columns in the Excel file. It's our database, or more than 50 variables that we are able to identify. And why do we believe that this is important? Well, we believe in transparency. We believe in democratic accountability. So we also believe that it's important that for these policies that are adopted by countries, it's important to understand which policy works, which policy doesn't work. Also to understand maybe for what circumstances, for what countries, identify alternative policies, practices that they work better, because at the end of the day, if we want to move in the direction of improving the environment or transitioning to an economy reducing the carbon emissions, we need to understand what policies are working to do the policies and industrial policy in the most efficient way without wasting public money or just using public money wisely. So that's why transparency is important. And now we don't have the information yet, but I believe that once these projects or these policies are implemented, they're adopted, and we can see the result, I think there is potential to do this evaluation, which I believe is very much needed. So that's all on my side. I'm open for any questions you may have.
So thank you very much indeed, Fernando. That is very interesting. I trust everyone will now ask the questions of which they want answers. I have one already on the Q&A from Gabrielle, which is, do you know the duration of these policies? And so at least according to their announcements, do you know how long they will last?
Yeah, as part of the new industrial policy, we have three variables that relate with the time dimension of the measure. We have the time that the measure has been announced by the government. We also have the time that's the day that this measure has been implemented. But then also we know the time that this measure is going to be removed, if it's going to be removed, in case that it's like short term. And we account that by days. So you can find these three columns, for example, 28 February 2024, implemented, and then we move maybe 28 February 2026. No? If this like kind of going to be removed, if this open-ended, then it's empty. But yeah, we do.
I mean, do they mostly have end dates, or I mean, in a sense, tucked away in the budget is presumably a duration, because they'll run out of money. They plan to run out of money, but that's not always announced. So are you sort of inferring this from other information, or you're just looking at the announcement?
Everything is come from official sources, and I have to say that we record most of these announcements and implementation date. There are very few Well, actually, as a matter of fact, I mean, we need to have that information because it's a criteria for inclusion. So we have either the announcement or the implementation for all the measures that they enter. However, for the removal, then most of the measures that we record, they don't have any removal. So we know when they're implemented, and then maybe we don't know when they're gonna come as they're gonna last.
Yeah, okay. And you recorded in the second slide, that 693 of the interventions actually liberalized trade. That was essentially undoing previous policies that would have been identified as industrial policy, or was it something else?
So depends on the policy instrument. If we're talking about tariffs and we have a liberalizing tariff, then we are talking about a tariff is being reduced, or it can be erased completely. Mm-hmm. So that would be a reversion of the policy. Or in the case of a subsidy, it could be also liberalizing because maybe then the subsidy was a higher level before when it was implemented, and now it reduced the financial allocation quite a lot. But when we're talking about import measures or export measures, then we're talking about for import, not import barrier, but maybe import reforms. So now this country that implements this measure is going to be easier for foreign companies to export this product in this country because they reduce maybe the amount of money that they have to pay, or maybe they make things easier, or maybe they actually revert another measure like a curve that it was implemented that is not anymore. And for export reforms, also the same. So maybe the government needs, is actually facilitating things for companies.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions from Tommaso. The first is a little bit open-ended, but don't get carried away. Can you say a little bit more about the methods? How do you identify the policies? Which documents are you referring to? Do you use NLP? And I confess I don't know quite what that means. So Tommaso, you can perhaps clarify. And as sort of concrete examples, how does the EU Green Deal sort of figure in these numbers, or sort of the industrial strategies which the UK announces every year or so? So just sort of a little bit of a feel for where this all comes from, and with a couple of concrete examples would be nice, I think.
So in that case particular, well, my unit is not in charge of getting the information. This is more my colleagues from monitoring, but they use official sources. So we just rely on information that we have a team that knows where they have to find information, where they have to go for every country when it's released. Once we identify a regulation, then we, I mean, the way that I see this, is like you have very unstructured information that is presented by government, via regulation, and then we have the expertise to identify the variables or the information to categorize it in a way that fits with our variables and our criteria. So, for example, the last one measure that I saw yesterday night was the announcement of the CBAM proposal by the United Kingdom. So we have already that measures in the NIPO. I think it's not implemented yet, but it's announced. So that enters. So the way that you could see that in the Excel file would be like the title, implemented by the United Kingdom. They will see the announcement date, implementation of the product is going to be an A, or if we know it, like maybe 2025. And then also, I don't know for this specific case, but we are also able to identify the HS codes, the product that are going to be covered. In that case, I don't know if this is actually set by the regulation by the British government, or our team gets the information because we have an app which is able to identify or assign HS codes, giving some information from the test. Just mentioning that we are we rely on web scrappers and ways of tracking the information, so in which we can actually fulfill the different variables of the database. So I don't know if that's answered the question. For the EU Green Deal is the same. We also have the variable.
Yeah. Well, and there is a paper from January, February, perhaps January, I think, and you can sort of follow up a bit on that, Tommaso, or sort of take it up bilaterally for more of the method. Tommaso has also come up with another question, actually, which ties up with something that I was wanting to ask you, Fernando. You refer to from Tommaso, you're referring, to the rationale as the objective, and how often, or do you at all, make a judgment about whether the policy that is implemented essentially is necessary or even useful for that particular objective? I understand that sort of in a sense asking for you to input into this rather than just report, but you can say any reflections you have on that. I was going to say, my question was actually similar, that the motives you take, if I understand it, just what the government writes down. This is why we are doing this, and how not to seem too cynical. That places a lot of weight on what they tell us. And I think I infer that there are multiple motives sometimes, and that's sort of very reminiscent of the lawyer's approach. You throw everything you've got at a problem and you hope that something sticks. The judge doesn't throw them all out. So I don't know if you can sort of reflect on those two questions.
Yeah, no, on the first point, you're completely right, Alan. We only capture the information that is in the regulation. So this is the step mode. And we have some criteria to identify the motives. So, for example, for the national security criteria, if we only find an explicit reference to national security in the regulation with these specific words. So therefore, that's one example. Then for transition to carbon economy, we have another criteria, but we need to be very objective on the way that we present the information, because what we are showing here are the facts. So we are just showing what governments are doing or what they claim that they are doing. And then we don't enter in assessing whether that's the real motivation or no. But that's a very interesting point. I have been presenting the database already in London and other places, and it's always the same question. That there could be a big mismatch, between what the governments claim and also what are the real intentions. We cannot differentiate that yet. Maybe if we look a bit deeper into the regulation, or maybe by comparing different dimensions, no? So as I was saying before, if you have a strategic motivation or stated motive by the government, this measure is because of climate transition or low carbon economy, but then you see that most of the products, they refer to I don't know, something that's you can actually see that what the country is trying to do is protecting the national industry, then that is for you to say. But you can say that already with the database, no? Because you see the product and you see the motivation. But we don't enter in that because we want to be objective.
Yeah, indeed. Tommaso also asked about evaluation, but I think we know that's in the future. That's a job for you to get research grants for, Tommaso, in due course. So watch this space.
That's interesting because so far when we can measure the cost, no? We measure the value of the subsidies. We also have a column that I forgot to mention about the trade that is covered by the measure. So we can see the amount of imports that are affected entering each country covered by so these are the only two ways that we measure the cost. Then we need to see how we can actually measure the benefits. And when we have these benefits, we can actually make the evaluation. I think that's very important, and it's a very good point because now we're seeing like Mr. Trump now in the United States, that he's claiming that the policies by President Biden they are being a waste of money, or by the economics is not working. It's not. So we really need to know, like, what are the employments that are being created, what is the money that is deployed, and what are the goals, and then we can actually counteract this wave of politicians, that they say otherwise, or maybe just learning from mistakes and say, well, this policy is not working, so let's move to another that maybe works. Because we are economists, we know that resources are limited, so we need to be efficient and wise what we do.
Indeed. So
it's not like we have a lot of time, because we have, if we want to improve the climate change, it's like we need to do it. What we have to do needs to be big, and we have to do it needs to work.
Yeah. I think the contribution, in a sense, is setting up an information base from which other studies, can draw with a view to, assessing, the coherence of the stated objectives and the policy measure, and then, eventually evaluation. It's just the necessary first step, and I think for many of us, extremely useful at that. Actually, a sort of a question that is not dissimilar in the sense of just providing the means for other people. You are doubtless aware that there is another effort to quantify sort of new economic policy, the UHash-Lane sort of Danny Roderick stable. I don't know where they're using, I think, natural language processing of, as it were, GTA version 1, or the current GTA. I don't know if you want to sort of draw a few contrasts between what they're doing and what you're doing. I mean, not necessarily with a view to showing that yours is best, but sort of also bringing out perhaps complementarities. I won't enter the judgment.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I think I'm well situated to mention that, because I retrieve the data for them. So I mean, the data that they use is from Global Trade Alert, and they use a very interesting approach, and I think it's quite good actually. They use natural language. So everyone that is familiar with the Global Trade Alert database know that we have this information is not public. We have it ourselves. The description of the measure. What is public is the type, but in the description we summarize what is the policy intervention about. So what Danny Roderick and his team made is they identify some keywords that, if they are found in this description, they assume they target this intervention as an industrial policy. I think it's a very interesting approach, and I think that it's worked quite well. So that's why they were able to use or to identify industrial policy from 2009 until now. So that's a kudos to them, because it was very, very smart and very good. What we have done is slightly different, because we don't rely on text mining or keyword search. What the way that we identify industrial policies is like we say that a measure in the Global Trade Alert is an industrial policy if it covers certain product categories, like, for example, dual-use items, advanced technology products, climate change, low carbon transition products, these kind of technologies, or if it's associated with one of the stated motives, so enhancing competitiveness, low carbon transition, other things, or if it's an industrial plan, or if it's implemented or announced from 2023. That's why we call it new industrial policy, because, as I was saying at the beginning, in 2009, industrial policy was very different from what industrial policy looked like now. So if we actually use our criteria that we have right now to infer industrial policies in 2009, maybe it doesn't work that well, because I assume that in 2009 there was not this worry about dual-use items or maybe low carbon technologies. So that maybe is not the right approach. That's why we call New Industrial Policy Observatory, not because it's 2023, but because we believe that industrial policy right now, or from 2023, or maybe after COVID, is associated with a different set of public objectives. So if we want to focus after COVID, I think our approach is good, because we focus on these things to identify the categories. If you want to focus from 2009, I think that the keyword search, given the information that we have at GTA, is the best approach. So I don't see the two approaches competing. I see that they are quite complementary, because at the end of the day, come from the same the same database.
Okay, thank you very much. And indeed, most of these jobs that are worth doing more than once. We actually believe in competition. Thanks very much for that, Fernando. I have a further question, very brief, because we've only got a couple of minutes. I was interested in how many of your examples are referred to dual use products, either by themselves or with the other other product categories. And I wondered how you defined that. Is it purely military, or is it something else? Just say briefly how you settled on this set of dual use products.
The dual use item list come from the United States. I don't remember right now the institution. I think they have source from the American government, but I don't know if it's the Trade Department or they have a list. I can share it with anyone who is interested. But just saying that this definition of products of HS code, they always come from official sources. Like from low carbon technologies come from the IMF dashboard, from the dual comes from the American government.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so an American definition of dual use is a little bit like shorthand for stuff that we're going to beat up on. Let me pass over to you for 30 seconds to say something uplifting so that people don't go away with that last comment in mind.
No, just apologizing because I took a bit more time than I expected, but I hope that everything was clear, and also I'm sure that you will be able to access my mail in case that there is any further question or anything related with the database. Just saying that in the Global Trade Alert webpage, you can find the trial with the data that was launched in January 2023. So you can always take a look. Just contact me if there is any question.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Fernando, and all your colleagues as well. I think it is potentially a very, very useful resource, and it's the necessary place we have to start to do decent empirical work. So it's been very useful. It's been very interesting. Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's come along to the meeting. I hope you have enjoyed it like we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right.